Picture this. It's the harsh winter of 1915. The world is tearing itself apart. Across the Atlantic, Great Britain, the mightiest empire the world has ever known, is on its knees, drowning in unimaginable debt from the Great War. Its lifelines are being choked off one by German U-boats lurking in the cold, dark waters. The nation that once ruled the waves is now just weeks away from total economic collapse. In New York, far from the mud and blood of the trenches, a man sits in a dimly lit office on Wall Street. He's J.P. Morgan Jr., son of the legendary financier, and he's just received an urgent telegram from London. The air in the room is heavy with the scent of old paper and new fear. He unfolds the message, and the words practically jump off the page, stark and terrifying. Without immediate financing, the empire collapses. In that single breathtaking moment, the fate of nations shifts. Morgan realizes something that would have been unthinkable just a year before. The survival of the British Empire, with its centuries of history, its global reach, its very existence, now rests squarely on his shoulders. He, a single American banker, holds the keys to the kingdom. But this isn't just a story about staggering sums of money or the cold calculations of high finance. This is a story about people. It's about the young clerk in a London government office, watching with dread as his country's gold reserves dwindle to nothing, wondering if his brothers fighting on the front lines are dying for a lost cause. It's about the grizzled Canadian miner deep in the earth, digging for silver that he doesn't know will be secretly shipped across the ocean to back a desperate, clandestine loan. And at the center of it all is J.P. Morgan Jr., a man living in the shadow of his colossal father, now thrust into the single greatest financial gamble in history. He had to make a choice. Should he risk his firm, his reputation, and potentially the stability of the entire American financial system to save a foreign power? Or should he let it fall? This was more than a business deal. It was a decision that would redraw the map of the 20th century. Morgan had to organize a loan so massive it was unprecedented. $2.5 billion. In today's money, that's like trying to raise over $60 billion and doing it in secret. He had to convince hundreds of skeptical American banks, from big city institutions to small-town lenders, to invest their money in a bloody, uncertain European war. Many Americans were fiercely isolationist. They wanted nothing to do with Europe's problems. Morgan's team worked tirelessly, operating in a world without computers or instant communication. They sent coded messages, held secret meetings, and battled against anti-war sentiment and even German sabotage. They were essentially creating a financial second front for the war. While soldiers fought in the trenches, Morgan and his network of bankers fought in boardrooms and on trading floors. They weren't just moving money. They were moving munitions, food, and supplies. Every shell fired, every loaf of bread eaten by a British soldier was made possible by this invisible financial pipeline. This incredible, secret operation not only saved the British Empire from bankruptcy, but also fundamentally changed the world order. It marked the moment America stepped onto the world stage not just as an industrial power, but as the world's banker. The center of global finance quietly shifted from London to New York, all because of this one monumental high-stakes arrangement. The story of how one man became the banker for World War I is one of the great untold dramas of modern history. It's a powerful reminder that wars are won not just with bullets and bravery, but with gold, credit, and the courage to take a world-changing risk. It's a human story of pressure, legacy, and the silent, immense power of money to shape our destiny. London, 1914. Rain lashes against the windows of the British Treasury, just weeks after war has torn across Europe. Inside, a young junior clerk named Edward Halley watches his superiors, the most powerful men in the empire, shuffle papers in a state of quiet panic. Britain, the great global power, has gold reserves, yes, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough. The war is consuming everything. Shells, rifles, ammunition, uniforms, all of it is being devoured by the conflict faster than the treasury can possibly pay. On the Western Front, German artillery is ripping through Allied lines. And back home, British factories are just beginning to stir from decades of peace. They can't keep up. One morning, standing in a hushed corridor, Edward overhears a phrase that sends a chill down his spine. It's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lloyd George, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "We need America," he says to a colleague. "We need Morgan." Across the Atlantic, in the heart of New York City, the offices of J.P. Morgan & Co. are buzzing like a well-oiled machine. John Pierpont Morgan, Jr., having inherited the empire from his legendary father, sits in his vast office. He's a broad-shouldered, imposing figure with a presence that commands the room. Telegrams from London are piled on his desk, and as he reads them, he understands a truth that Britain refuses to admit publicly. The British Empire is broke. Not metaphorically, literally. Its gold reserves are bleeding out. Within a few short months, it won't have enough to buy bullets, let alone pay its soldiers. Morgan leans back in his heavy leather chair, tapping a single finger on the polished oak. So, he muses to himself, the empire needs a banker, and we're the only shop in town. This was the moment the world's financial center of gravity began its seismic shift from London to New York. The British thought they were asking for a simple loan. They were wrong. What they were about to do was mortgage their empire. What the young clerk Edward couldn't possibly know, but what J.P. Morgan understood with perfect, cold clarity, was that financing Britain's war was far more than just a business transaction. It was the ultimate form of leverage. It wasn't just about earning interest on a loan. It was about gaining control over the very supply chain that would determine the war's outcome. A week later, Edward, with his ink-stained fingers and wide, worried eyes, is given a shocking assignment. He is to accompany a senior Treasury delegation to New York. He packs a small bag and boards the RMS Orduna, a grand ocean liner now sailing under the shadow of war. As the ship cuts through the churning, gray Atlantic, storms crash against the hull. The vessel is filled with men who carry the immense weight of an empire on their shoulders. Edward finds he can't sleep. Lying in his narrow bunk, he thinks of his sister back in Southampton, already rationing food. He thinks of the miners in Wales, working exhausting double shifts to pull coal from the earth. He pictures the letters he's read from soldiers at the front, the pages stained with mud, the words filled with a quiet, persistent fear. He whispers into the darkness of his cabin, a question that haunts him. What if America says no? The journey feels endless, but finally, the skyline of New York appears, a stark monument of steel and ambition. The British delegation, a collection of grim-faced men in dark suits, makes its way to 23 Wall Street, the headquarters of J.P. Morgan, a building so famous it was known simply as the Corner. They are ushered into a world of polished marble, brass fittings, and the low hum of immense financial power. But when they arrive, they find something utterly bizarre. Morgan isn't waiting for them in a conference room. He's not sitting behind a desk ready to negotiate. Instead, they find him in a records room, poring over vast lists of British purchase orders. He's inspecting everything: rifles from Remington, artillery shells, horse saddles, telegraph cables, even woolen blankets. He is examining their shopping list as if he already owns the entire supply chain. The lead British official, a man used to commanding respect, approaches him nervously. "Mr. Morgan," he begins, his voice strained, "we have come to discuss a loan." Morgan looks up from the papers. His eyes are sharp, and he doesn't offer a smile or a comforting word. "I know why you're here," he says, his voice calm and direct, "and I will give it. But I'm not just giving you money." He straightens up and slides a document across the table toward the stunned delegation. It's a secret purchasing agreement. The terms are breathtakingly simple. and absolutely audacious. J.P. Morgan and Co. would become the exclusive purchasing agent for the entire British Empire in the United States. Every rifle, every boot, every shell, every horse, every single item Britain needed to fight the war, all of it would now pass through the hands of J.P. Morgan. He wouldn't just be their lender. He would be their gatekeeper. Standing in the back of the room, Edward feels his throat tighten. His mind reels. This wasn't a loan. This was a takeover. A silent, bloodless coup executed with a fountain pen. Morgan wasn't just offering to fund the war. He was inserting his bank into the very heart of the British war machine. He would control the flow of materials, negotiate the prices, and manage the logistics. He was making his bank an essential, indispensable part of the Allied war effort. When the delegation returns to London, the news is spun for public consumption. Newspapers proudly announce that America is backing Britain. The public cheers. Politicians breathe a collective sigh of relief. The immediate crisis is averted. But the true nature of the deal remains a closely guarded secret, hidden from the British people and from the world. Edward returns to his small desk at the Treasury, but nothing is the same. The papers he shuffles now feel different. He knows the truth. The British Empire, the ruler of a quarter of the globe, the power on which the sun never set, now had a silent partner. A partner who didn't sit in Parliament or answer to the king. And he lived in New York. The age of empires was ending, and the age of finance was just beginning. This incredible shift of power set the stage for the 20th century, and its effects are still felt today. Imagine it's 1916. New York Harbor is a forest of steel masts. American ships are everywhere, being crammed with mountains of supplies, everything from rifles to bandages. All of it purchased by one man on behalf of the British Empire, J.P. Morgan. The Great War wasn't just consuming lives. It was eating money like fire eats oxygen. And then, the worst possible news arrived. A sealed letter from the Bank of England, addressed directly to Morgan. Inside was a devastating confession. Our gold is gone. For the first time since Napoleon, Britain had completely drained its reserves. The world's largest empire was secretly, horrifyingly broke. If the public ever discovered this, the panic would be catastrophic. It would tear the empire apart from the inside out. Morgan immediately summoned his top advisors. The air in the room was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and raw fear. He looked at them and said, "Gentlemen, we are not just financing a country. We are financing a war. And wars have deadlines." The survival of Britain was now on a countdown timer, ticking away in a New York office. To keep the Allied war effort alive, Morgan had to do something extraordinary. He couldn't use gold that didn't exist. So he turned to two other resources, Canadian silver and American credit. Thousands of miles away, in the frozen wilderness of the Yukon, a miner named Thomas McKinley worked relentlessly through brutal blizzards. He was just a man trying to pull enough silver from the frozen earth to make a living. He had no idea he was a critical piece in a global chess game. That silver was being quietly funneled into the British War Fund, a secret substitute for the missing gold reserves. Thomas McKinley had never met J.P. Morgan. He didn't know he was helping to save an empire. He just needed to earn enough money to take his sick son to Vancouver for proper medical treatment. His personal struggle was unknowingly propping up a global superpower. Back in London, the secret was taking its toll. A young clerk named Edward Hall was given a terrifying assignment. His orders were to destroy every single document that showed the Treasury's true, desperate condition. Every ledger, every memo, every trace of the financial ruin had to vanish. If Germany ever learned how close Britain was to collapse, the psychological blow would be immense. British morale would shatter, and the war could be lost right then and there. Edward hesitated for a moment, the weight of history on his shoulders. Then he began to feed the papers into the fire. He watched the flames twist and bend, just like the future he could no longer see. The truth was turning to ash. He was erasing a pivotal chapter of his country's history to ensure his country had a future at all. Meanwhile, back in New York, Morgan just kept going. He kept buying supplies. He kept lending money he was raising from American investors. He was now the sole financial gatekeeper for the Allied powers. By 1917, Morgan's personal loans to Britain had reached a staggering amount, over $3 billion in today's money. He was single-handedly floating the war effort. But even for a man like Morgan, there was a breaking point. It came on a fog-filled morning in New York. A final desperate message arrived from London. The telegram was short and brutal. "We cannot continue. This will kill us." The financial strain had become unbearable. Morgan slowly folded the piece of paper and whispered to himself, "It already has." It seemed like the end. The great financial gamble had failed. The British Empire was about to default in the middle of the greatest war in history. But then, just weeks later, history took a sharp, dramatic turn. The United States officially entered the war. Suddenly, it wasn't Morgan's private loans anymore. It was the full, unstoppable might of the U.S. government's treasury. Government money flooded in, replacing Morgan's private credit. Britain was pulled back from the brink. The empire stood back up. It would survive. When the war finally ended in 1918, newspapers across the world printed massive headlines celebrating the victory. They wrote about the brave soldiers, the brilliant generals, and the steadfast politicians. But they never printed the real secret story. They never mentioned that for a critical period, J.P. Morgan had become the unelected, unofficial financial spine of the British Empire. No one ever voted for him, but his decisions held the fate of millions. He had wielded more power than most kings. And what happened to the people caught in this invisible web? Edward Haw, the clerk, went home to a changed London. He was older, quieter, forever carrying secrets he could never share. He had seen the truth and then burned it. Thomas McKinley, the miner, tragically lost his son. But for the rest of his life, he kept a small, worn silver coin in his pocket. It was a reminder that even the smallest lies, the quietest struggles, can unknowingly shape the course of history. And J.P. Morgan? He simply closed his ledgers on the biggest financial operation in history, and with his typical detached focus said, "On to the next venture." This story leaves us with a powerful and perhaps unsettling message. History isn't just written by the names we all know, the kings, the generals, the presidents. It is constantly being shaped by invisible decisions, by hidden hands moving pieces on a global board. It's shaped by fragile lives and quiet sacrifices, by people whose names never appear in any textbook. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world is the one that no one ever sees. Thanks for watching. If you found this hidden piece of history fascinating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that you weren't taught in school. See you next time.